I, like a lot of you, have been playing a lot of Outlast 2 in recent days, and something has really stood out to me, and it's slowly driving me crazy the further I get into the game, and that is something called Ludonarrative Dissonance. Now, if you're not familiar with the term, that's okay, it's pretty new. It was coined by a game developer by the name of Clint Howard. He worked with LucasArts, and then he moved and started working with Ubisoft, and he coined the term in a blog post in 2007, but it basically refers to this concept of there being dissonance, or basically this gap between a game's narrative and a game's gameplay. So think of something like the Uncharted series, where you play through and Nathan Drake is this really good guy and he's this hero that you're rooting for. But at the same time, as you go through the games, he kills hundreds, if not thousands of people in cold blood during shooting sequences or doing whatever gameplay time. Now, the debate is essentially whether or not those sequences are necessary in order to make the game fun. If you have a game that completely follows the narrative, you're going to end up with a game that might potentially, not all the time, but potentially be lame, especially as you get into deeper and darker or more complicated stories. So, with that in mind, we come to Outlast, specifically Outlast 2. Now, the first Outlast, if you aren't familiar with it, was a horror game set in an insane asylum, and you were playing essentially a journalist who had a video camera going in to document all the atrocities that were going on inside of the asylum, and you got caught up, and you're basically just trying to escape by the end of the game. And no spoilers, but the game it centers around the idea that you can't fight back, that you are in this dark, horrible place, that there's murderers all around you, crazy people doing disgusting and evil things, and you can't even pick up a rock and hit them with it to defend yourself. Now, in that game, there is a strong establishment that it's the first game in the series, that, okay, this is a cool concept. But going into Outlast 2, I was expecting them to at least elaborate on that idea or maybe shake it up. But no, they've stuck with it entirely. You, again, no spoilers, but as you play through Outlast 2, you run into these instances where any rational human being would slap or push or do anything. If somebody comes up to me and grabs me by the throat and pushes me against a wall, my first instinct is going to be push and claw and poke anything I can. It's an instinct at that point. It's not even a conscious thing. Really, the only way you could justify it is maybe to say that the character you're playing is Gandhi, but even then, Gandhi still said at times in his life, something's natural, you should probably defend yourself in certain cases. Pacifism hits a wall eventually. And when you play through Outlast 2, you're going through this environment where there's horrible, horrible things going on. Like, so horrible, if I mention them in this video, even in vague terms, YouTube would take it down. Like, horrendous things go on over the course of Outlast 2. And so you would think that that would cause your character to respond in a more significant way than to just kind of, I'll just run away from this problem. Oh no, I'm not going to deal with it. It goes back to ludonarrative dissonance. Because the narrative calls for some sort of physical reaction, at least to pick up or rip off a piece of wood, or to go and punch or kick or scramble or claw, anything to really try and save your life when you're in these life-threatening instances. But the game chooses to prevent you from doing that for the sake of the gameplay, to make it spookier, to make it seem like you are indefensible. And I can understand why that is necessary, but I think it's lazy. And the reason I think it's lazy isn't just because it is a sequel, which makes it far worse. The first Outlast game, I was willing to kind of forgive it. There was this sense that you were dealing with a sort of supernatural force, that you really wouldn't be able to defend yourself in these cases. You had the pig man, basically, who's this massive behemoth. And you have similar sort of characters. But even still, there still was this dissonance between the player, because I'm saying, no, I would want, and Like that security guard has got a knife, a pocket knife. I would pull that out and start stabbing people with it. Why can't I fight back? And it's really started to bug me and nag me as I go through the game, because there's more and more instances as you go through where your brain is screaming, like, just kick the dude or push him off the cliff or do whatever. Why do you have to just run and hide? Why is that the only thing you can do? And it's because of the gameplay, and I understand that. But at the same time, it's incredibly frustrating because you can never truly follow through on what your brain wants you to do. You have to basically put yourself in a state of mind that is unnatural for any human being to have. You're trying to shed an evolutionary instinct that has been developed into mankind. And again, it's a video game. I understand that. I completely understand it. But a good horror game would embrace that. Resident Evil 7, for instance, was able to embrace that willingness to fight back in all sorts of ways. You were dealing with creatures and beings that were supernatural. They were beyond nature. They didn't follow the typical rules of nature. But it was still terrifying, and you still felt helpless even though you tried to fight back. When you're fighting like the father in a certain instance, you could go and you could scramble and try to hop into the car and run over him, but it still doesn't work, and it's still terrifying, and you still feel helpless. Or you go and you grab a freaking chainsaw and you start fighting back, but you still feel helpless. That is a way to let players play the way that their brain tells them to without making it totally nerfed, where it's no longer scary because you can defend yourself. And that's primarily where I think the disappointment with Outlast 2 comes, where they had a chance to really innovate. And I think I sent out a tweet when the game first released and I first tried it, and I said simply that the game seems to have kept all the things they should have changed, and they seem to have changed all the things they should have kept. They slowed the game down with these flash forward, flashbacks, doing all sorts of weird stuff to try to tell a story, which is intriguing, I will grant you. And I haven't reached the end of the game, but I hear that it's at least intriguing. But they do all that at the cost of the gameplay and of the sort of pacing of the story, at least as far as I've gotten in the game so far. And all the while, I'm playing through the game constantly thinking, this is ridiculous. Any rational human being would respond, would defend themselves in some way. And it's just incredibly frustrating. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I'm just ranting into the ether about something that is completely insignificant. But with horror games especially, I think Ludonarrative Dissonance is important. Horror games are all about immersion. It's all about putting yourself in the shoes of the player character to the point where you feel like you're the one experiencing this. It's why a lot of horror games avoid strictly voiced protagonists. Not all of them. More recently, they've been going in that direction. But a lot of horror games are just purely focused on that empathetic immersion to get you in the mood to play the game and experience it the way that the character in the game is experiencing it. And in order to do that, you have to follow it through and avoid ludonarrative dissonance at every single turn. And Outlast 2 completely fails to do that, but rather embraces it. It says, yeah, no, ludonarrative dissonance, come on in. We're best friends. The entire game is going to be like this. Even as you're being chased down by a crazy woman with a battle axe, you can't even pick up a rock and throw it at her. You can't even jump over a barrel. You can't even climb up a fence that's made of 3 rungs of wood to get outside this. It all could have been fixed by a little more creative writing, a little more creativity put into the gameplay, where they say, you know what, yeah, people would fight back. Maybe we can set it so as you're running through this corridor, you can press a button, kind of like a QuickTime event, and you can pull barrels down or knock pallets down and wood or throw dirt in the eyes of somebody to try and get away. That's a relatively simple and straightforward gameplay mechanic, but apparently they didn't want to do it because it would empower the player and make them feel like they weren't totally helpless in this totally messed up scenario. And it's a gameplay choice that they made. It's something that I disagree with. It's something that is preventing me from enjoying the game, I think, to the extent that it could be enjoyed. It's something that is affecting the way that I partake in the game and enjoy it, and it's really bumming me out. I unfortunately expected more from the sequel to one of my favorite horror games of all time, if not my favorite horror game of all time. It's disappointing, to say the very least, but I want to know your thoughts, if you agree with me on this, if I'm just ranting and there's no reason to be upset about this or frustrated by it. But that's all I have to say. Thank you. And if you like the video, subscribe, hit the like button, consider supporting me on Patreon. I'm a broke college student. Anything helps. Thank you for watching. Love you all. I'm gone. Bye.